There are myths about the Mongols and Genghis Khan that shouldn't be believed. In this article, we'll debunk a portion of the legends about the appearance of the founder of the nomadic empire and the horseman's connection to Russian swearing. The persona of the founder of the Mongol Empire, Temujin, artistic pseudonym, Genghis Khan, is shrouded in many legends. One of the most popular myths is related to his appearance. Supposedly, the real Khan was not a typical slant-eyed Mongol. In reality, he probably had blue eyes and red hair, indicating his European origins. Perhaps Genghis Khan was even from those semi-legendary true Aryans. However, there's no evidence to support this theory. What is known about his appearance is limited. In most sources, Genghis Khan is described as tall, strong, with a broad forehead and a long beard, but nothing is mentioned about the color and shape of his eyes or his blondness and red hair. The rumor of Temujin's European appearance probably arose from the 14th century Persian chronicler Rashid ul-Din, who once mentioned that the Mongol leader had red hair and green eyes. However, this is doubtful, as the author could never have met the Khan in person. He died precisely 20 years before Rashid was born. The historian's description was based on accounts from people who spoke with those who supposedly saw Temujin. Proponents of Genghis's blue-eyed theory also point to his ancestral name, Borjigin, which can be translated as bluish-gray. This supposedly indicates that everyone in this lineage had blue eyes. However, Temujin's name can also be translated as grey wolf or pure and noble, so there are certain doubts here as well. In short, there's no precise information about how Genghis Khan looked. However, his famous portrait in the Chronicle of the Yuan era from the 14th century was painted under the supervision of his grandson, ruler Kublai Khan. And it was presumably approved by him. The latter was 12 when his grandfather died. He might have remembered him and could have consulted with those who also saw the Khan. When we hear the word horde, we often imagine an immensely large army, hundreds of thousands, or even 1 million warriors. Much like the orcs from fantasy tales, numerous, unstoppable barbarians overwhelming with sheer numbers in any attack. However, the real Mongols were not like that. Different researchers have provided varying estimates of the size of Mongol armies. For instance, the renowned Russian historian Nikolai Karamzin claimed that in 1237, 500,000 nomads invaded Russia. He later revised this figure, presenting a more modest, yet still colossal number for those times, 300,000 warriors. However, this estimate seems heavily inflated. A much more realistic assessment was provided by another Russian historian, Erenzen Kora-Davin. He determined the maximum size of the Mongol army during Genghis Khan's reign to be 230,000. Specifically, this was the size of the nomad army during their campaign against Khwarezm. By the time of the ruler's death in 1227, based on records from that period, the Mongols had 129,000 warriors. This number is corroborated and deemed credible by the Russian historian Georgy Vernadsky. Archaeologist Anatoly Kopychnikov, in his studies, concluded that the number of nomads that invaded Russia was around 100,000, with a maximum of 150,000. The Mongol army always seemed larger from a distance than it actually was. The reason for this was that the average nomadic warrior always had 3 to 4 reserve horses, periodically switching between them and moving cargo. This ensured that the horses were always fresh and not fatigued. Furthermore, the myth of the monstrous hordes was reinforced in history because many Russian, Chinese, Persian, and Arab chroniclers exaggerated the number of invaders attacking their homelands. Were the Mongols barbarians and savages? This misconception is closely tied to the previous one. It's believed that the Mongol horde relied on sheer numbers rather than military skill, because the nomads were uncivilized and lacked any sense of organization. However, this is far from the truth. The Mongol army was strictly disciplined and had a clear chain of command. It was divided into Arbans, Jaguns, Minghans, and Tumans. All these units were subordinate to their respective commanders. They had excellent lamellar armor, composite bows, military scouts, siege engines, and even cannons borrowed from the Chinese. Army commands were given using lanterns and flags, a groundbreaking innovation for those times. The empire also had its own script, legislation, currency, and logistics. Moreover, the advanced civilization of the Mongols is evidenced by their postal and courier service, one of the first in history. It was an innovation of Genghis Khan's successor, Ojibday. Mongol mounted couriers could deliver a letter from one end of the empire to the other in just 2 weeks. Along the way, they would stop at postal stations, called Tian Yam or simply Yam. And, lastly, the Mongols were among the first to come up with something called a salary. Nomadic warriors obeyed their commanders not out of heroism or fear but received a stipulated contract payment for their service, plus various allowances. So the horde was not a mob of savages, but rather a genuine contract army. The Mongol Empire, the largest in the world? Not quite. The nomadic empire created by Temujin is indeed the largest land-based state in history. However, the British Empire, from 1919 to 1922, had a greater territorial expanse due to its numerous colonies. Moreover, controlling territory doesn't necessarily mean populating it. At its peak, the Mongol Empire's subjects and tributaries accounted for about 25% of the world's population. However, the aforementioned British Empire, as well as at different times the Umayyad Caliphate, China under the Qin dynasty, the Achaemenid Empire, the Macedonian Empire, the Maurya Empire, and the Gupta Empire, ruled over even more people. There's a belief that certain very unpleasant words, which we can't publish here, were introduced to Russia by the Tatar Mongols. And Russians became accustomed to using these expressions over the lengthy period of yoke, lasting roughly 250 years. However, this isn't true, and it's easy to prove. One just needs to read some of the ancient Russian birch bark letters written long before there was any mention of the Mongols. For instance, one such document, designated by the Russian linguist Andrei Zalizniak as Novorod Birch Bark Letter 955, mentions female intimate parts, using the very terms we still use today. So, vulgar swearing wasn't a nomadic invention. Are all Russians descendants of the Tatar Mongols? No, Russians are not descendants of the Mongols. In fact, it's not hard to see this for oneself. A simple visual inspection would reveal that the average Russian does not possess the typical features of the Mongoloid race, such as slanted eyes and heavy eyelids. In the minds of some alternative history enthusiasts, during the Mongol yoke, the nomadic troops swept through Russia, killing the indigenous male population and assaulting every woman they encountered. However, reality was quite different. The Mongols neither occupied nor settled Russian lands. These lands were on the very periphery of their territory and were of interest only as a source of taxes. The Mongol lords didn't even appoint their own viceroys, preferring to subdue local princes and collecting tribute directly from them rather than from the peasants. Thus, most ordinary Russians from the 13th to 15th centuries never actually saw a Mongol. They paid increased tributes to their local prince, who in turn settled accounts with the periodically visiting tax collectors from the horde. However, some members of the Russian nobility did intermarry with the nomads. For instance, in 1257, the Prince of Belozersk, Gleb Vasilkovich, married a woman from the horde for political reasons.